we're going to get our speaker here in a second. While you're all here, thank you again for coming. I really try and use my LinkedIn to share things that are happening on the Financial Services Committee. So if we aren't already connected on LinkedIn, type in Mike Flood Congress, and would love to connect with you, especially the business students, so you can follow all this in Congress as we go along. So I have the real honor here of introducing and having a fireside chat with the chairman of the Financial Services Committee. This is his 20th year in Congress. He has served the people of North Carolina. He was in the legislature there before you came, right? And two girls? Two girls and a boy. Two girls and a boy, okay. And he is retiring from the Congress this year. You don't even know what you're doing yet, do you?
No idea. I mean, I don't know. I could be a barista. I like coffee. I don't know. That'll come in January.
So just by way of reference, the Financial Services Committee has, what do you say, about 50 members?
Okay. Yeah, 58 members. We are the second largest committee in the House of Representatives. And I think Andy framed it very well. We're the American Dream Committee. This is the foundation of our economic system. Is born out of our policy set. And then we're talking about the most innovative part of our society, and with the strongest demand for innovation, which is fintech. So it marries up quite nicely, and I love what you've done in the second year of your event. I'm honored to be here.
Yes, thank you.
Be a part of it.
Something you need to know about the Financial Services Committee, I think it has the adults in Congress work on this committee. I'm talking the Democrats and the Republicans that really care about getting stuff done, serve on the Financial Services Committee. And I will tell a quick story about his leadership, and then we'll get right into a few questions. But you all remember the SVB disaster in March of last year?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I was brand new on the Financial Services Committee. I had come from the Oversight Committee, which if you watch TV at night, you know what that's all about. But this SVB bank fails. The FDIC comes in, I think, closed it on a Thursday. Now it's Friday. I went about my business. I was up in Sioux Falls with my family, and his office calls all the members of the committee, and he says, "Hey, can you be on a Zoom call tonight at 6 o'clock, be 7 o'clock Washington time, and we're going to have the FDIC on there. We're going to have the Federal Reserve. We're going to have the OCC." All the members of the Financial Services Committee and all the members of the Senate Banking Committee were invited. And so we jump on, and essentially the message from the chairman and others is we're in a really tight spot right now. The Asia markets open in an hour and a half, basically. We think there's a contagion in our financial system. And we are going to get a report from the FDIC where they're going to talk about making depositors all good, regardless of the $250,000 limit. And Chairman McHenry basically said, this is bigger than politics. This is our American banking system. Does anybody have any questions? And the questions from the committee members, I thought, were really good. It showed an acumen from both Republicans and Democrats about what was going on. And at the end of it, the chairman, together with Senator Brown over in the Senate and others, basically said, "We support you. We appreciate what you're doing at the FDIC. And for America to survive this next week, we need to all be on the same page." And I don't think anybody knew how dangerous that time was. And left to another committee, that could have turned into a disaster. You want to just talk about that? What was your weekend like? That was a long weekend.
Terrible, but we find ourselves in these seats of government, in these seats out of desire, love for our country, desire for a better policy outcome. But we're really interested in a strong America, regardless of the party. And in moments of crises, especially related to our financial system, it is far better to have a great deal of information and to be slow in speaking. But when you speak with confidence and perfect clarity. And that was a very, very messy time. There are imperfect decisions made by people sitting in important seats of government. But what I wanted for our position, for our committee in the House of Representatives, is to speak in a measured way that would bring greater confidence to the market. And I'm grateful that we were a cooling force for that, and not overreacting to a moment that was really a crisis of two banks, two very specific types of banks, and not a broad financial crisis. So we didn't need to respond and walk around like most policymakers do, which is walk around with a hammer and think everything's a nail. We have to see what happens and be measured with the outcome. And so what we did in that setting is find out more information before we proposed any policy decisions or policy changes, which we're still now implementing some of those policy changes.
So you've been a primary driver of the whole conversation about digital assets, stable coins. When did you get interested in digital assets? What eye-popping moment did you say there's something to this, and where do you see it going?
Well, I was there, you see on the picture of Ben Bernanke testifying before Congress and a little white piece of paper behind him that says buy Bitcoin. I was there for that hearing. And so from the very beginning, I watched and really tried to understand what Bitcoin was, the underlying technology that was new, and what it could do. And I've had this big desire of how you bring down the cost of payments, how you bring down the cost of the movement of value. How do you transact better, more efficiently? How do you get those results for people? And so I've been following this from the very, very beginning and been very slow to move on a regulatory framework until this Congress, when we've been able to move major legislation out of the House to bring some clarity. The truth is, I've been drawn to financial services banking policy because I saw my dad start a small business in our backyard, mowing grass for other people. And he took the risk with a business partner and bought a lawnmower. And the second piece of equipment they bought was with the best piece of financial technology of that era, which was a MasterCharge, now MasterCard, the advent of broad-based payments. And he financed a truck to put the lawnmower in the back of. So when I understood the risks my dad was taking and asked some of these basic questions of how do you pay for these things and how does this work, those are the foundational principles of my economic view. Not virtual reality screens. This is actually, the substance of my childhood was mowing other people's grass. And my dad scaled that business, and it was, doing a business across North and South Carolina, and the largest business of its kind in the Southeast, but created out of our backyard and created out of a MasterCard is the foundation of the first piece of outside capital he got. And so I've always tried to figure out ways to unlock those potentials for different people. Not that I have a view of what businesses they should be involved in, but the means by which they can get a little bit of risk capital to go take a little bit of risk in society and do something for the better for themselves, for their families, for their community, or for the world.
People always want to talk about, what do Republicans think on cryptocurrency, or what do the Democrats think? Talk about passing your fit for the 21st century. It wasn't as partisan as anybody thought it would be. In fact, you got how many votes from Democrats? Explain that. You and Ranking Member Waters have been working on stablecoins for a long time. She may not embrace stablecoins, but Wiley Nickel, a Democrat from North Carolina, really does. What do you see in Congress when you look at the partisanship of digital assets?
So on digital asset, let me just step back for a second. So as chair of the committee, I was ranking member for 4 years. I've been on this committee for 20. But to become chair, I'd watched other chairmen, chairwomen of my committee and other committees, some that did it in a very laudable way and others that I found deficiencies in whatever way. And I decided that if I wanted to be, as chair of the committee, I wanted to run things in my own way. And that was to recognize I could set the agenda and I can set the time frame, but I can't dictate much more than that. So I set the agenda on 3 things that have had traditionally bipartisan rhetoric in Congress and some bipartisan votes. Number one, data privacy. Andy Barr mentioned data privacy, our need for a strong data privacy, financial data privacy law for the United States to bring us into the 21st century and a 21st century law and regulatory framework. Gramm-Leach-Bliley was contemplated before the current digital, the regulation of financial data was before the consumer internet. That was in the late 90s when Gramm-Leach-Bliley was passed. So we certainly need to update the law to conform with the current digital reality of finance. So that's one. Two, capital formation. The ability for folks to get new investment capital for their businesses, number one. Number two, have access to new investment opportunities. And number three, clarify and improve our public markets so that you can go public. And we've traditionally passed capital formation bills out of our committee with bipartisan votes. And if you construct the policy well, you can actually get bipartisan votes. And so the third piece, which I was most hopeful would result in bipartisan votes because there had been bipartisan rhetoric, was on digital assets. We need a regulated stablecoin regime for an on-ramp to this digital world of cryptocurrencies. And as a payment system, a new rail, potentially, if you can do it correctly, not just for us domestically, but internationally, and linking the world with our financial conditions in the United States will be good for the world. The rule of law and that level of data security, financial security, born out of our rule of law will be very important for the world. So you need a regulated stablecoin regime at the federal level. And you need to clarify what is a digital asset. Much of what pretends to be a digital asset is actually fraudulent activity in the current state of play. Because we've not defined what is a digital asset. You have some things that are commodities, some things that are securities, and they will conform to one of those two regimes. You have some things that are out in the marketplace that say they're not securities, but are, in fact, most assuredly securities. But we have the Securities and Exchange Commission and the current chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission playing games with this industry rather than providing clarity, trying to get headlines by suing Kim Kardashian, then providing regulatory clarity over $1 trillion asset class. This is, talk about playing in triviality and in really playing stupid games to get attention. That's what the Securities and Exchange Commission has done rather than provide any level of clarity. The CFTC wants to provide clarity, but they can't do it without their sister agency of the Securities and Exchange Commission doing something at the same time. So Congress has to step in. What I set out to do is set that agenda that has bipartisan votes, say that we're going to try to stay on track. We're going to produce legislation, and we're going to do it at a sensible, rapid clip for Congress, glacially slow for the rest of the world and how the rest of the world works, but at a fast clip for Congress. And so we moved apace, but every time we had a hearing about these three policy items, we took in and changed and adapted the policy set in response to the critiques of what we're talking about. The goal was to build out policy that could get a bipartisan vote if the policymakers were offering sincere critiques of the legislation. And what I found was policymakers are by and large sincere. And when you take their input and their critiques and you take them and improve the bill, they'll follow. And we had really fantastic Democratic critiques of our original kind of architecture on how to regulate and provide a regulatory structure for crypto. Just like with data privacy, just like with capital formation. So we kept adapting those policies. And what happened was the votes followed the policy changes. We first had a bipartisan vote out of committee over the objection of the ranking member on stablecoins. And then we had a bipartisan vote on market structure. This is the largest rewrite of financial regulation that we've seen since Dodd-Frank, and it got bipartisan votes out of our committee and 71 Democratic votes and a 2/3 vote overall in the House of Representatives. Now, just to step back, for those of you who don't follow Congress closely, for a 2/3 vote in this Congress, you only get a 2/3 vote for like renaming a post office, right? And it's like you have some dissenting votes, even though it's like a great American patriot who like saved millions of people's lives, and they only get a 2/3 vote. So for us to get substantive policy and get a wide vote like that was because the process was good. And then we took input and made the policy better and better and better. And then we had great allies on the other side of the aisle, right, Mike? And you were deeply engaged in the writing of this. So thank you for letting me tell part of your story.
No.
But it was folks like Mike, Richie Torres on the Democratic side, and Wiley Nickel on the Democratic side, Jim Himes on the Democratic side. And they said Jim Himes said, look, I'm a crypto skeptic, but I think something should happen for consumer protection. And here's the way that I think we should better protect consumers. We took all of that input, it's in the bill. So what we have is a much more balanced regime, and it can be lasting and enduring policy because we had bipartisan support and built consensus over time.
So we're going to go back to Congress a week after the election. Obviously, the 118th Congress ends at the end of the year. What are the prospects of getting something from the Senate? How do you see that on market structure?
So market structure and stable coins are two open questions for lame duck. I think we're not dead yet, is what I'll say. The election outcome will dictate much of what happens in lame duck. The National Defense Authorization Act and government funding are the two major pieces of legislation we'll have to wrestle with between now and the end of the year. Those two must-pass bills have traditionally taken a larger policy set with them. There's interest by the Senate Majority Leader and by a bipartisan majority in the Senate of getting something done on market structure. Likewise with stablecoin. The question is whether or not we will have the structure by which we can take consensus policy, which crypto now is, and take it across the finish line and get it signed into law this Congress, or whether or not I'll have to wait for a similar circumstance next Congress. The Senate is unlikely to take an independent Senate banking bill across the Senate floor because of both liberals and between some Democratic senators and some Republican senators. I don't want to describe them as liberal or conservative because I'm not sure what they are. Those labels may not actually fit who those individual senators are. And I don't want to use profanity in such a large crowd. So you have members that want to offer amendments in this subject matter, Senate banking, House financial services, in order to cut other people up or to go make a point, not make policy. And so what happens is we have to build consensus for our products, and then those consensus items can make their way into law as a part of a larger package. And so we're operating in that scope and trying to build a set of policy initiatives that are consensus. Crypto, market structure, and stable coins are at the top of that list of consensus items for a package like that.
He probably wouldn't tell you this, but when people come to my office and they want to know what are we going to get done the rest of the year, I always say, and Kurt can chime in here, but I always say if we get something done, it's because our chairman has built 20 years of goodwill with Republicans and Democrats, which does go a long way. People go out of their way to try and help him, where you don't get that from every committee chair. And I want to go off topic from banking and.
Well, that kind of sets a high bar because if nothing happens, it's also because
they don't like
I have no goodwill.
Well, I think it's working in your direction. So we're going to go off topic here. You will recall last year that the House of Representatives, for the first time in its history, took down Speaker McCarthy, who was the speaker when I came in to Congress, and had never been done before. 7 Republicans and all the Democrats voted to remove Speaker McCarthy. And in that moment, we all found out that the speaker, since 9/11, keeps a list in their desk or somewhere of the people that they think should be next in line to do that job. And the first name on that list was Patrick McHenry. And so for the first time it ever, I'd only been in Congress for like a year and nothing had gone routinely from where I sat. So to me, it was like, well, this ought to be interesting. And it was demoralizing was what it was, because this went on for the better part of a month. I kept getting on the plane embarrassed to be part of this show. But I want to just talk to our chairman about how did that all work? What happened? What did you wake up and do? Like you went from being the chairman of financial services to third in line to the presidency of the United States, and there is no playbook. This had never happened before.
Right.
And after he gives you this, I'm going to tell you what I wanted him to do, and we're going to talk about what he actually did and why it was so interesting.
Actually,
Where should we start? This is quite a story.
So, so Kevin McCarthy is one of my dear friends, and I've worked very closely with him for as long as he's been in Congress, and he came in the term after I did, and we've been very good friends for a long, long time. But after the election in 22, it was a very close outcome. Republicans had a narrow majority. We understood it was going to be very, very tough for Republican leader McCarthy to get the votes to become Speaker on opening day. And I had decided earlier in 22 to not run for leadership and stay at committee, because this committee agenda to me is what I've spent my whole time in Congress to build. No pressure on getting it done, but I'd spent my time in policy outcomes as a legislator. Your fingerprints on your service are written in code, right? Did you pass law? Those are your fingerprints, and it's for a period of time. It's not permanent, but that's your ability to have impact. For me, my decision to not run for leadership was I didn't think you'd leave those fingerprints, and I'd rather have policy than have some position. And so I had to tell my friend who had assumed that I was going to be helpful to him and be in leadership and help him be an effective speaker. I said, I want to be a committee chair. That's where I'd like to stay. And he was great about it. He was not happy with my decision. And I said, but when you need me, I'll help. Well, the skepticism when one politician says to another politician, just call me and I'll help you. There's a little skepticism. And he goes, yeah. All right. And then, and that was early in the year. After the election, we had this pretty tense phone call, and I hung up the phone with him. I'm sitting outside my daughter's Irish dance class. I'm standing in the hallway. I can tell you exactly where I was. And I hung up the phone. And I made a pledge to myself. I said, when he asks for help, I'll come. But no questions asked. I'll come. And I didn't, because he's a good friend of mine. I actually didn't tell him that, because he would have messed with me, because he has a sense of humor. But there were moments during his speakership where we have a big hearing, and I got up from the chairing the committee. I walked over to Andy Barr and I said, Andy, will you take the chair? Will you take the gavel? And I walked over to the speaker's office. I didn't know why I was going over to the speaker's office, but I made this pledge to myself: when he asks for help, I'll go. And so that led to opening week, negotiating for the speakership, and the rules and
debt ceiling.
And then the next time was the debt ceiling. And then the third time was Speaker Pro Tem. And I'd made the decision I was going to say yes. When he asked, I would say yes. And so for the debt ceiling, it was 2 weeks that it got pulled away from committee, which took our committee agenda that we designed week by week. And this time, 2 years ago, we described week by week. I knew what hearings we're going to have, subcommittee hearings we're going to have, and when we're going to approve bills. Didn't know the outcome of the bills, or what are the trade-offs going to be made, but we were going to have a committee vote by this time. So by being engaged in the debt ceiling, it pushed back our committee agenda by a month. And little did I know, and by the time we got to October, at this time last year, that I would be Speaker Pro Tem for 23 days.
What was that like, waking up that morning?
So one of my friends described the speakership as a prison, and I didn't really know what that meant until day 3 of being Speaker of the House. Now, I drive my kids to school in the morning every day that I can. Drive my kids to school, and my wife refuses to get a minivan, and so we have a station wagon. So I drove the station wagon, dropped the kids off to school, park it at the Capitol, and I get the briefing because we knew the motion to vacate was going to happen. And so I have to call my wife, and I said, well, can you come and get the car? Like, why? It was because Daddy's coming home in an armored car. So it was at day 3 when I realized that you're in federal protection 24/7 as Speaker of the House. And but just imagine this for your life, right? You wake up in the morning, you take the trash out to the street, you do all the normal things of life, right? You have one of your kids that has a runny nose, and you got to change your suit jacket when you walk out the house, like the normal stuff of life. Now imagine having a dozen people around you for all of those moments, right? Or your spouse thinking, this is probably not the most fun day of my life. It's a jarring thing to go through if you planned it. And to be unplanned was a particularly jarring thing. And so actually this was day 17, day 18 of the experience 1 year ago. So it was a striking experience. The 2 things I would share with you. One is I have a very fine appreciation for our intelligence capacity, our national security apparatus, in a way that is a newfound thing from where I was 13 months ago. That is a reassuring and good thing for America, and to be an American and someone who loves freedom around the world. 1. 2, our institutions do work. They are fragile and they have to be defended, but they do work in time. And not at the pace of technology, but they do work and they are resilient. We have to defend our institutions.
So this is the most interesting about this story. I was talking to Tom Cole, who's a congressman and well-respected member from Oklahoma. And there was a time in those 20-some days where a lot of people in Congress, like myself, and were so frustrated with all of the dysfunction that was happening, we would go up to the podium and be like, why don't you just do the job? Why don't you just be Speaker? And he was very clear that I don't want to be Speaker, which for a politician to not want power is, you really have to think about it, because it isn't normal. And I kept thinking, why doesn't he just do the job? Like everybody would be fine with him doing the job. Everybody likes him. The Democrats even like him. Like, we can get something done here. Maybe we have a coalition government. I don't know. But you resisted that. And it wasn't until maybe a few months later, I was talking to Tom Cole, and you resisting that power was not done for that in the moment. It was done for generations into the future. Can you talk about why you resisted it and what made you think like that?
So these systems have been developed over time. And as a new member of Congress, I didn't come with a love for the institution. I had a love for our elections and election process, but I didn't have the fine love of what the institution provided and how it worked. And that developed over time, and of deep reading of history and how the place works, and good mentors in the place. In the reading of the story of the House of Representatives, the power of the speakership developed over time. Speaker pro tempore, the Senate, and the Speaker of the House are not deeply defined roles in the constitutional order. The President pro tempore of the Senate gets very brief mention. The Speaker is a constitutional officer. The power of the institution is borne out in giving that power to the speaker in order to stand as a check and balance on the Senate and especially the presidency. Had I taken action, I would have eroded the power of the speakership in a way that would be detrimental to the institution and for the separation of powers between the House, between the Congress and the presidency. Now, when you sit in a seat like that, you may have that commitment the day before, but once you attain the power, you think, well, but I'm different, which is a huge mistake. You have to think you have to think of yourself in context to over 200 years of history behind you and hopefully hundreds of years ahead of you. And your actions can have a detrimental effect generations down the line, sitting in a role like that. Now, as a committee chair, I can say, or as a member of Congress, I can say any number of stupid things, but as Speaker of the House, you have an obligation to operate differently in that wider context. I felt that.
How much pressure were you on, just not just from inside the Congress, but there was this thought that if America got attacked, what would you declare war, or how would it work? Were you just getting incoming from everywhere?
No, I made a decision that after the first sleepless night I had, the first night, which I don't have sleepless nights. I had a sleepless night. And that moment of like, you close your eyes for a moment, you open your eyes and you realize, oh, I've got a solution. This is simple. It's simple. And from that moment, when I woke up that second day, or didn't wake up, just rolled over, it was a whole lot easier. And I decided I don't want anything. People wanted me to want something. I didn't want anything. And once I decided that, everything was easy. Then I could just go make the right decisions for the right reasons, with the best information I had at the time, and think of that broader context. And so once I did that, I knew it was going to be okay. It was going to be okay. What the first day was about was trying to entice me into doing things and making decisions so that I could pad myself. I could get something, a different role, this other outcome, this or that. And I decided I want for nothing, right? I got what I wanted to be, which was to be committee chair. You're not going to entice me into anything else. And once I operated that way from that morning, it was much lighter as a result. We care about the institution, and it developed over time, and we eventually got to a good decision and a very good outcome. It just took a long time for us to get to a very good outcome. And I'm glad we did. Now, here's the one thing I want to say, because you brought this up and you forced me into this emotional rear view mirror here, is that, and you haven't shared this, but if I was not going to be the presiding officer during that time period, you were my backup.
I know, I got called in to do that one time, yeah.
And so,
I would have done a lot with power. I mean, everything you said is great, but yeah, there's a few things I would have done.
But it's the level of trust that I have in you and the confidence that I have in you, not because you've been a member of Congress a long time, actually probably because you've not been a member of Congress. No, I have such confidence in you, and so that's the reason why you're number one on my list.
Well, thank you. I was just thinking about my legislative service the other day. We got some state senators here, and I was there 10 years, and I finally figured out what I wished I would have figured out when I was the speaker, and that is, it doesn't matter what the governor of Nebraska thinks. If you've got 30 votes in the legislature, you can do whatever you want. You can, with 33 votes, you can really do whatever you want, because then you can overcome a cloture motion. But too often, I think members of the legislative branch fail to understand what our real authority is. And I woke up from my dream about that, and I was thinking, when I was speaker, I was really the prime minister of Nebraska. And I never took advantage of it. You had it laid at your lap, and you did the right thing for the right reasons, and nobody understood it. And now, if something happens to a future speaker, whether it's death or resignation or unseated like Kevin McCarthy was, a precedent wasn't created that can throw our constitutional, our system into a constitutional crisis. So,
Well, the first briefing I had was with a House parliamentarian, and I said,
he told you could do whatever you want, didn't he?
I said, well, what do we know of the position? He goes, well, you just you just recessed the House. So that's the first precedent of this position. I said, what? He goes, yeah, we'll call it the McHenry precedent. I said, to recess the House? Yeah. It's like, well, this is truly uncharted territory. But 23 days from October 3rd to October 25th, when we elected Mike Johnson.
And I think it's safe to say members of the House on both sides very, very much appreciated his leadership. And that didn't show up in the paper, but it did show up in the hearts and minds of a lot of people that are serving.
Thanks, man.
So one last question. You're wrapping up 20 years in financial services policy. What are you most proud of as you look at your policy-wise that you've accomplished or you've worked on or been a part of?
It goes back to the Jobs Act. When we passed the Jobs Act, bipartisan majorities in the House and the Senate, Republican House, Democratic Senate, Democrat in the White House. We passed the first major change to securities laws in nearly 40 years. And I'm quite proud of the policy work we did there and what that has done for our financial markets and competition. And then I hope to have, then obviously this Congress. Second, I would put the negotiating the debt ceiling agreement that brought about the largest spending cuts in American history, largest budget savings in American history, and kept our financial house in enough order that we can get through this time period and get through this election and sift out financial policy, economic policy in the next administration. And then 3, to come. It's what I hope to get passed into law in the next 2 months. But to be honest with you, the service on the Financial Services Committee and the relationships and working with people on both sides of the aisle that I have enormous respect for, that's been the gift. That's truly been the gift of working with good folks. And so a good friend of mine who retired from Congress, he says, I called him 2 years after he was out of Congress. He said, tell me what I need to know. He says, well, I don't miss the circus, but I sure do miss the clowns. And I think I'll miss the clowns. I think I will.
Well, please join me in thanking him for his service and for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.